Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome CEO, Cambridge Leadership Associates, and author of Adaptive Leadership, Alexander Grashow.
Welcome to our conversation on financing for impact and scale. This is a new format for CGI, and so what you'll find after we hear from some presenters is we're going to have a community dialogue. And so we'll hear from all of you and have a conversation about what are we learning around this tool and this issue. What are the challenges? What are the choices? What's working? And how are we going to take that forward? And so I invite you, while our presenters are up there, to track the themes. Track what's going on. What are the risks that need to be made? What are the investments, places for partnership? Because the question before us is a wonderful invitation to think about how we're ambitious. How can we be more ambitious and deliver on that? How are we going to get to greater impact and scale? And the questions before us are really, how are we going to adapt? How much of our business models are we going to take with us? And what are we going to let go of? What are the pressures, the competing pressures that we have in how we operate our businesses and partnerships are we going to reprioritize? And how are we going to find the creative solutions and deal with the short-term pressures versus the long-term pressures to come to some different outcomes? And so our hope over this time is to figure out how we're actually going to operate differently. And one of the ways we're going to do that is by hearing from you, not just in the hero stories of here's my organization and here's what we do really well, but what have you struggled with? Or what are the choices that means? And if we can share those things as a group, as a collective, we can move forward in a different way. We know that getting to greater scale and impact is going to require dramatic partnerships of scale. And so what do we need to learn together is the challenge in front of us. And so I invite you, when you participate, to think about not just what's working, but what's it going to take to shift off of business as usual. Okay? So that's our challenge for the next little bit. I'll have the three presenters go, and then I will, with your permission, help that conversation move forward. And we ask you to participate with the best of your curiosity and wisdom. Our first speaker, Stephan Ouaknine, who's the CEO of Inerjys Ventures, will share his work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sure. So I'm so honored, so happy to be here, and frankly so excited to be here to talk to you about what we're doing up in Canada in Inerjys. Our commitment is to deploy $1 billion over the next 7 years in clean energy technology and financing. But we're doing it through a growth equity fund with a twist. We're trying to be a little bit disruptive. I've been disruptive for the last 17 years of my career. I may say things that some of you may disagree with, so I invite challenges at the end. But this is the problem we're trying to tackle. Climate change is a big deal. This is an image that was taken only last week. As you see, the Arctic sea ice is shrinking at a historic rate. It's getting worse and worse. So if we don't tackle this problem at the core, the biggest problems here, we're going to be facing some pretty disastrous consequences. Let's see where the carbon emissions come from. They mostly come from the energy sector. That means that even if we replaced every car on the road with an electric vehicle, we wouldn't necessarily solve the problem, certainly not fast enough, if we don't tackle energy, the energy infrastructure in the world. And if we look at the energy industry, we see a very disturbing thing, which is that for all of the hype, for all the talk about clean energy technology, for all of the airport advertisements we see with pretty wind turbines and wonderful solar panels, it's only 3% of the global market. That means we're not dealing with the problem. Why aren't we dealing with the problem? In my experience, I come traditionally, or my history is from the telecom sector, and I saw some pretty hyper growth in the telecom and ICT sector. I'm Canadian, so I like hockey sticks. I saw a hockey stick of growth. We're not seeing that because innovations aren't generating the kind of cost efficiencies that we need in order for it to make financial sense. At the same time, we have to look at the markets. We have to understand the addressable market. Do you know, in telecom 20 years ago, if you were in London, it was inconceivable that you could make a call other than through BT. And yet dial the clock a few years forward and you could stroll down Oxford Street and choose from 15 different communications players. Why don't we have that in energy? When the market in telecom opened up, we saw a wider addressable market generating all kinds of innovation infrastructure investments. That's what needs to happen in energy as well at scale. Now, who is normally responsible for real disruptive innovations? It's usually the VCs. Take it from me. I've been dealing with VCs my whole life. Not always easy. VCs are shying away from the heavier parts of clean tech. As an asset class, they haven't made money. They talk about it a lot. So even though here at CGI we hear a lot of great examples of things that are working, they would call it niche. They would call it not profitable. We're not attacking the problem. Banks and private equity funds, similarly, are very risk averse. So we have to understand that. Markets, on the market side, we have to look at the regulatory environment and allow for multiple new alternative energy players to come in. And so what's the winning formula? Well, what we're trying to do is to take what were two separate worlds, the world of utilities and energy generation and retailing, and the world of supply chain, the world of the equipment that goes into those projects, and bring them together. So this vehicle, this growth equity fund that is called Inerjys, we're advocating as a model, and we hope so many others will join, is bringing those two asset classes together. We do growth equity investing in companies that have products that are doing clean energy more efficiently. But at the same time, we're investing in projects, utility-grade projects in clean energy around the world. And so here's the idea. It's a very simple idea. You see lean burn over there? The biggest problem that we found in the world of tech, the one that the VCs were failing to make profits on, is the companies that they were funding were taking round after round of funding, but the revenues were hard to come by. And so the model of investing from the same fund into a project and a product company is very deliberate so that you could deliver revenues from the projects to the product companies. So the product companies could grow organically, sustainably, in a healthy way without using over-dilutive funding. Now, assuming that we have these great innovative companies growing on their own revenues with references, strategic investors into the fund are very, very important as well, because these multinational corporations are needed to act as resellers, as distributors, as OEM partners for those smaller companies. On the branding side, why can't we have the Vodafone of clean energy? Why is it that we can have in telecom a 200-country-strong branded utility company who has leverage over its suppliers? Ericsson shakes in its boots when Vodafone calls. Why can't we have that in energy? Think about it. The only branded energy companies you can think of are usually petroleum companies. Why don't we have a service provider which is global and branded? If we had that, not just one called Inerjys, but many of them, the market would change. The regulatory environment would follow suit. Now, global utilities are also going to rely on public-private partnerships. One of the things that really excites me about CGI is this advocacy of public-private partnerships. And so at Inerjys, we really extended a hand out to the Canadian government, to the Quebec government, and in Canada, $400 million in the last federal budget was put towards fund investing, with a recognition that that government money could be best served to stimulate job creation and energy leadership in Canada by putting it in the hands of fund managers who are doing innovative things. And so I'm quite proud of that as a Canadian. Similarly in Quebec, because in Canada we get to be Quebecer and Canadian at the same time, in Quebec we have a wonderfully supportive government as well, which has been investing directly into funds. And so governments getting involved and with their regulatory environment as well are very important. This will generate yields for funds. And if we generate yields, more LPs and institutionals and pensions that ran away will come back. Copycats, scale. And so the takeaways that I want you to leave here with from my sort of idea is that finance is a human construct. Why do things in finance have to be so rigid? This is from the perspective of a serial entrepreneur who got into the finance game after years of building things and being disruptive. I don't understand why things always have to fit into buckets. The chairman of a large global bank told me one time, "Great idea, I love it, it's exactly what we need to do." I said, "Great, why don't you invest in our fund?" He said, "Well, we just don't do that." So public and private coming together is a powerful thing. Scale is going to follow from sustainable business plans, And impact is going to come when we have that kind of scale. So thank you very much. I invite you to get in touch with us and to further the discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So again, as we start to get ready for this conversation, think about some of the themes that Stephan brought up. Why not, right? What would we have to give up from the way business operates now to achieve that ambition, right? Think about those questions. The other question, right, of what would it take to get to that scale? How many partnerships, private partnerships, would have to be created? At what scale different from the way we operate now? Again, let's have a conversation about how do we achieve that ambition. David Ferreira, I'd like to ask you to come up next, the Managing Director for the GAVI Alliance. Thank you.
Hi, I'm David Ferreira from GAVI, and I thank you all so much for being here. It's great. GAVI is a public-private partnership, and our basic mission is to try and get out to kids in the poorest countries of the world the vaccines that are available routinely to kids in the rich countries of the world, like the United States. Every year, let me put it this way, almost 7 million kids die across the planet before the age of 5. And roughly 1 in 5 of those kids dies as a result of pneumonia, almost all in the developing world. And many of those deaths, here's the thing, are preventable by a vaccine that is routinely available to all of us in the rich countries. So that's why in 2007, we came to CGI and we made a commitment to roll out pneumococcal vaccines and other life-saving vaccines to kids in the poorest countries of the world. And as part of that, we made a commitment to raise at least $30 million from the private sector to achieve that ambition. And I'm delighted to say today that in terms of the financial commitment, we've raised more than double that amount from the private sector through May of 2011. And I'll tell you in a few minutes why that date is, why I picked that date. And then let's take a look at the results in terms of pneumococcal vaccine. So this is where we stand today. We've been able to approve funding for pneumococcal vaccines to be rolled out in 46 of the world's poorest countries. And in 18 of those, the rollout is already happening as we speak here today. As I stand here today, we've immunized 12 million children already across the planet and growing. The bubbles that you see there are a snapshot of just what happened in 2011. And so the question is, how did we do this? And fundamentally, we used an innovative finance mechanism called the Advanced Market Commitment, or AMC. And the AMC essentially said to vaccine manufacturers, look, if you can produce a pneumococcal vaccine that is appropriate for use in the developing world in the quantities that are required and at a price that is affordable, then we will buy it. So in effect, we de-risked the market. And indeed, that's exactly what happened. The results that I showed on the previous slide are because by 2010, we were able to start rolling out the AMC and to be purchasing vaccines and distributing them all across the planet. As Alexander said, we've been asked to talk not only about the successes, but also about lessons learned. Now, clearly at the high level, in terms of its principal objectives, the AMC has been remarkably successful and has had a huge impact across the planet. One of the objectives that we had in the AMC was also to bring in new manufacturers in particular from the developing world who were not previously producing the vaccines. And while that may still happen, it has not happened yet. And I think what we're starting to learn is that the type of incentives that were provided through the AMC to existing manufacturers in order to scale up are just quite different from the incentives and the support that are required for new manufacturers wanting to come into the market with longer development lead times and with other needs. And then, I guess there we are. I wanted to speak very briefly about 2 other innovative finance products that we have at GAVI in order to give you a picture of this suite. So the one is the GAVI Matching Fund. And the reason I mentioned May 2011 a few slides ago is because we launched this in June 2011. And it's a very simple product that just says, look, if you, a corporate or an employee, gives $1 to GAVI, we, the British government and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, will match that dollar for dollar. And so far, we've got 7 corporate partners in, private sector partners in. We've raised over $50 million. The idea is to raise over $260 million by 2016, by the end of 2015. And this has been a great way to bring in not only private sector money, but also skills and champions. And we can speak a bit more about that. I also wanted to mention, which is not on any of these slides, IFM, the International Finance Facility for Immunization. This is a big capital markets bond issuance program that we have. So we take these long-term government commitments from donor governments that are pledged to GAVI, and we use those pledges, those assets, as security in order to go out to the capital markets in Japan, Australia, the UK, the US, everywhere, to raise money that can be spent when it's needed. And that enables us to invest in particularly rolling out vaccines to an unimmunized or underimmunized population to get benefits that will then be come over time forever. And the reason I mention these 2 other products is to talk about fit for purpose. I mean, each one of these products is designed to hit a particular purpose. The AMC is about de-risking the market. IFM is about predictability and flexibility. And the GAVI Matching Fund is about bringing in private sector, as I say, skills, money, and advocacy and champions. And then finally, I just wanted to talk about sort of 3 maybe very big picture takeaways. The one is, immunization is just a great investment, whether it is at the family level, the country level, or the global level. And it's also a great leveler of the playing field and creator of equity. The second is that if you're going to get something like this right, then it is imperative that it be done in partnership, and that it be done with corporations, with foundations, with governments, with civil society. And the third is, going back to the discussion yesterday between President Clinton and Jim Kim, I mean, we're hopefully do provide not only are these products kind of designed to be fit for purpose, but they're hopefully also designed to be scalable. And to have, in fact, global impact. And so one of the things that we try to be is one of those platforms that will allow any particular input from a partner, from a corporate partner, from an individual, from whomever, in order then to be captured and scaled across the entire planet. And that's really it from me. So thank you very much.
Obviously, as we're having a conversation about getting to scale and impact, it's beautiful to note the scale and impact that we're already having, right? So just as we think about this and honor what's been done in the room. I also am aware from your talk about the challenge, when can we de-risk, and what do we do when we can't de-risk? And how are we going to think together, maybe in our conversation, of how those risks could be shared differently? So let's have that again as we think about themes for the conversation we're about to have. Elizabeth Littlefield, I'd like to bring you up, the president and CEO of the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, which, as I've learned, is the U.S. government's development financial institution. Thank you
very much. Thank you to all of you for being here. I'm actually looking forward to this new format because I know there's a huge amount of expertise and leadership right around in the room, and I'm looking forward to hearing the conversation that will follow. So bear with me for a few minutes before that happens. As Alex said, I am the CEO of OPIC, which is the U.S. government's development finance institution. Our mandate in life is to help channel private sector capital to address and invest in sustainable economic development in emerging markets. We do so by providing the financing, long-term financing, attractively priced financing, and the risk mitigation tools that remove the barriers to risk and create the incentives for private sectors to invest. So in essence, we are the ultimate private-public partnership. Everything we do every single day is, in fact, a public-private partnership. We invest in the kind of things like low-cost housing, like infrastructure. We're doing a huge amount, in fact, in renewable energy, as you know. We're investing in water and sanitation, agriculture, and also in microfinance, which I'll come to in a moment. Last year, we did about a little bit more than $3 billion in commitments, of which we're very proud to say 60% was in low-income countries, up from 15% the year before. So we're making a big effort to go down market. Speaking of going down market, I've been asked to speak of 2 commitments that OPIC and an organization I worked for before, CGAP, has done in trying to bring financial services down to people who currently have no access to them. So I'd start with the first one, which is a partnership that we made together with Citigroup in 2006. We made a commitment of $100 million to create a microfinance facility that would reach unserved markets. The problem at the time was that microfinance was not reaching particularly poor people. About 90% of it was reaching only 150 microfinance institutions, and of those, 90% of them were in Latin America and Europe. So we wanted to go deeper. And also, none of this financing was available in local currency, so not much help to a microfinance institution to borrow in hard currency and have to have their revenues in local currency. So what was the solution? Well, we looked at our comparative advantages. We looked at the fact that OPIC has a development mission, has very deep pockets and financial resources, has a very healthy risk appetite compared to all other investors, and we're a development agency trying to do poorer countries. At the same time, we have no local offices and no capability in local currency. Aha! So we came to our colleagues, Citigroup, and I'm seeing Bob Anibale in the row over there, who's a huge partner in this. Citigroup, on the flip side, has a local branch network, the ability to do local currency, but limited risk-adjusted return requirements that we don't have. So voila, a perfect partnership of two organizations who came together to create this facility. We're very proud that that $100 million commitment made in 2006 has now blossomed, and we're now at $350 million. $350 million, reaching over 1 million borrowers in countries that Citigroup never would have been able to reach before, 90% of those being women. So I'd like to just show you two quick stories of these women. Lillian Alwi is a Kenyan woman who took a loan, $6.5 million, from Kenya Women's Finance Trust to start and grow her private school. Her private school called Ongata Pine Breeze Academy. She started going door to door, trying to recruit customers, students one by one, and is very proud to say now that she's got 500 students ranging from age 3 to 12 years old, and 36 different teachers, and she's looking to expand nationwide. This was only done, of course, thanks to Kenya Women's Finance and the OPIC City Partnership. Another quick example is Mercedes Cabrera, who started with the classic, the quintessential microfinance story of 5 sewing machines in a little building someplace, and has now expanded to 36 sewing machines and is distributing her clothing all over the country and expects to start exporting soon. So that's the two stories there. I'd mention just a couple of things. One, in terms of the challenges that we've had. Clearly, the no-pay movement in India and Bolivia and elsewhere has created losses. We've lost money in those deals. But more importantly, customers have lost because their creditworthiness has been damaged without them knowing it by them following the politicians' urge to not pay their loans. So this has been a real challenge to us. I'd say the key takeaways in the partnership. One is, as I mentioned, clearly we're bringing our respective comparative advantages to the table, which is very important. Let's not try to have everyone do everything, but figure out what you do best and then go to the other guy for what he does best. Secondly, having two sophisticated institutions looking at each other's processes was very important in the early stages, and over time, we've lightened up on that as trust built, and we recognize that Citi's origination capabilities were as rigorous as our own. And finally, trust. Ironically, OPIC is actually quite invisible in this. Despite the fact we have 70% of the risk, most people don't even know we're part of this. The borrowers don't know. The microfinance institutions don't know. Many of you probably didn't know this either, but yet we've got 70% of the risk. But you know what? That's okay, because we're getting it done. That I want to move on, and I don't think I have any slides for this, and just mention to you the second program, which is about bringing financial resources to unserved markets. This is a program that was announced in 2005 at the Clinton Global Initiative, a partnership between CGAP, the consultative group to assist the poor, a microfinance organization housed at the World Bank. The problem that we sought to address there was that actually microfinance doesn't really reach very poor people. Never did, can't. Because the really, really extremely poor, the destitute, the hungry, the vulnerable, those that have nothing and no connection to society, they don't know how to access financial services. They don't have a livelihood that could generate enough income to pay back a loan. So we sought to address this problem. Ford Foundation, CGAP, in partnerships with many other people, some of whom I hope are in the room. What we wanted to do was adapt a model that was built by BRAC Bangladesh, one of the greatest and largest NGOs of all time. And BRAC had figured out a way to reach these extremely poor people through different methodologies and graduate them up into the ability to effectively use savings and financial services. So we sought to emulate that and see if we could make this incredible program work in other parts of the world. We launched, thanks to the CGI, we launched 10 pilots in countries ranging from Yemen to Ethiopia to Honduras to Ghana to, I'm sure I'm forgetting some, Paraguay, all these kind of countries, 10 pilots. And we experimented with the sequencing of grants, hand-holding, livelihood support, skills building, asset transfers, coaching, et cetera, different sequencing. And I'm proud to say now, as of this year, 6 of those pilots are complete, and the results are quite astounding. In those 6 pilots, we see, again, through randomized control trials of very sophisticated academics, we see effect of these families being having higher incomes, having more diversified incomes, 30 seconds, higher incomes, more diversified incomes, having bigger asset bases, greater food security, higher nutrition, and better health outcomes, as well as education. And perhaps most importantly of all, we see these families really having a forward-looking attitude, the ability to plan, to have confidence, to see the future, and know that they have some ability to plan and chart their own courses out of poverty. Thanks very much.
So let's begin the conversation. And I think one of the ways we can start is this question of shared risk. I mean, there are wonderful examples of what Elizabeth talked about with Citi, where they have an effective partnership, but the risk isn't even. Or what Stephan talked about with the Canadian government and between government and private industry. Where is the risk shifting? And how are we understanding where risk needs to shift? And what will it take to do that? So let's start the conversation here. Yes. Microphone. Please wait for the microphone. Yes. Thank you.
Sorry. I'm Bob Nibali. I would say that in addition to the kind of work that OPIC does, there are a lot of other programs where different investors share risk through different levels. For example, you could have first loss risk takers and different tranches of risk. And I think that's been, I mean, Assad can speak to that, and others who've done funds where very often either agencies or other investors who can take a higher level of risk take that first loss or different tranches. The other is sometimes joint ventures or investment. You might take the longer term if it's lending. You might take the longer tenors, which makes it difficult for a commercial investor necessarily to go out as far as a development agency or someone else may be able to take. So,
and in those cases, though, you don't always get the investors that line up exactly on those risk profiles that you want to. So what are you learning about how to shift them? How do you actually get the deals done, not where the investors come from, but to get them into the right portfolio to get to that outcome? Because that seems to be an important part of the work.
One of the roles the catalysts play very often as an impact investor is in helping to get you at the table, get different types of investors there, and to build a history. I think most of us who've done this have built a history where then, whether it's with equity or it's debt, they're very often going in at it with less of a risk participation or different investors. So I think it's a very important role to be a catalyst of that, and that those proportions of who shares risk and how is as really has to match up both your investment priorities and profile. Sure. But it's about building a history and a track record very often at the beginning.
Yeah, and well, let's think about how do you build that track record when not everything is proven to work, and what do we do with failure in that space too? Because that track record is critical, but we don't want to make that mean that we take smaller risks because we're so invested in that track record. So other comments? Yes, up here. Microphone. Thank you.
Jonathan Reckford with Habitat for Humanity, and we've got a live example, Elizabeth, where we did pilots in about 25 countries trying to create housing finance access to very low-income families, and nobody wants to loan to them because there's no secured loan available. And what we found is microfinance groups could profitably lend to low-income families, but how do you then take it up? And so we actually are working with OPIC and a variety of private investors to now model that with a wholesale fund where we're providing wholesale funding and technical assistance to MFIs to give them, to actually set the track model. And our goal actually is to prime the market, but it's the perceived market risk that we've got to get over by building that experience curve. So it's going to take whether impact investors or some group of folks who are going to lay out the path to remove those barriers for investment.
And what did it take for you to learn that? I mean, that's not the skill that's built into your institution historically, right? That's a big leap of growth. So what did it take to actually grow into that way of working for you?
I think for us, it was the look at that we would never directly build enough to get to the kind of scale we wanted. So using the credibility of our direct construction, those relationships, to then try to figure out where the barriers, and our two big barriers were property rights and then financing. And so we're trying to tackle both in different ways. But it was taking money we otherwise would have used for direct construction and lending it to try to validate at least our initial tests.
Yeah, and I don't imagine that question of how much are we going to give to direct construction and lending was also an easy conversation in your organization, right? And again, I want to pull out these choices we have about where we're spending our dollars and money. Up here we have one. I'll come back to you in a minute, Ann.
I think one alternative that probably doesn't provide major funding, but is something similar to crowdfunding, just like Kickstarter. I mean, there's some of the projects on Kickstarter are fairly outrageous, and they're getting funds, but huge risk aversion, something that a venture firm would not put money into. And some of those outrageous projects are far riskier than some of these projects in other countries that people are trying to achieve. So I think there's, again, an alternative for, other sources and other alternatives of financing, other than starting with, the philanthropic, the venture firms, but down to, the average human being who wants to invest in these types of things and needs some level, wants some level of return, but is, willing to take a risk, because for people like Americans, it's small dollars, that are being invested.
Right, great. Yeah. Ann in the back. Come around, yeah.
Yes, my name's Ann Hastings. I'm the CEO of Foncose Financial Services in Haiti. And Elizabeth, you forgot to mention Haiti being one of the pilots. But we were actually the first one to finish. But so we do know about reaching the very, very poor. But one of the things that really struck me as really, really impossible for me to deal with was how to protect my clients who work so hard to create and build assets from losing those assets every time there's a hurricane or an earthquake or a tropical storm, whatever. So the challenge for us was, how can we bridge the divide between the poorest people on the face of the earth and global reinsurance markets? And in fact, we've done that. We've been experimenting with it for the last 2 years. We created an insurance company with Mercy Corps. Swiss Re is the reinsurer, and it's working very well. Our clients from Tropical Storm Isaac, we have about 4,000 claims, and they're actually getting $125 in cash and get their debt eliminated and a new loan when they're ready for it.
Yeah. But just to follow up on that for a second, I mean, the creativity to have those kind of partnerships is pretty extraordinary, and the amount of time it takes to get those to work. But also, I said this yesterday, but there's a great Thomas Edison quote that, I never made any mistakes, but I know 1,000 ways not to make a light bulb. Right? And so in that experimentation, what did you learn in that experimentation of what works and doesn't to get to that outcome? I think we want to hear that in too.
I think it was the most challenging thing I've ever undertaken to do, but it was like I was driven to do it because I couldn't just keep watching my clients lose everything. So while in the pilot with CGAP, we were replicating what someone else had already thought of, this time, we were really breaking the barriers ourselves, and it just came down to relationships. It's all about building relationships. And once you get the relationships at the leadership level, then the difficulty is to keep that same consensus, the same mission drive that you have to go all through your organization. We're not 100% successful. There's plenty of tweaking that we still need to do with it. But I think we've shown the world that you can provide even the poorest people, and they're paying for it. They're not paying the full cost, but they're paying for it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, let's come here. Again, I want to keep focusing on this question of shared risk, right? Because as we talk about relationship and being a relationship, we're also not talking about risking equally.
I was on mistakes we've made rather than
do you want to bring that? Feel free to bring that in.
Maybe And I'm sorry for that because Anne certainly was a huge leader in this revolutionary graduation program. But just one of the kinds of mistakes we made, we're taking super poor people and trying to give them assets so that they can start building their way out. And in the beginning, one of the assets we gave them was a goat. And we figured the goat would make milk and that would be a long-term asset. What we found was that they needed immediate cash flow that week, that month. And so what they were doing was selling the goat. So then in the next iteration, we said, okay, we'll give you a goat and 2 chickens. And then you use the eggs from the chicken for your daily cash flow long enough for the goat to be able to be mature enough to start having its own kids. So those were kind of the experiments where we in the West sort of underestimated the day-to-day and immediate concerns for cash in the way we transferred assets to those families.
Great, thank you. So coming up here. Yeah, Mike's coming over to you.
Hello, I'm Craig Rominger. I'm the CEO of NanoIce, molecular ice technology. We use it for food preservation. We started a foundation called the Post-Harvest Project last year, and we're making a commitment this year to put innovation bundles in place in Ghana within a certain supply chain of fish, the commodity that we've chosen. And that's how we found out that there was a way to share risk by putting innovations together in a bundle within a supply chain. So different technology companies come to bear and actually do the research and put in the time and effort, and the catalyst is post-harvest. So we go in and do the studies, we monitor the impact and set up the protocols and actually get funded through philanthropy and impact investment first pilot projects. But they're all proven technologies. So risk sharing can be done among partners that are trying to expand their business globally that maybe couldn't afford to market or put an infrastructure in these countries. But through an entity like ours, the Post-Harvest Project, we give them the access and exposure to those areas of the world and fund those initial projects to make them successful. So I think that's another way that works too, using a public-private partnership.
Right, and that helps with the risk mitigation. We're going to come in here and then I'll come back to you. And I owe you 1, 2, 3.
Hello, my name is Andrew Tanswell. I'm the Chief Executive of Tough Stuff, which is a social enterprise providing solar-powered solutions to people in the developing world. Very, very low-cost items. Our commitment, and I'll explain it to you, and it actually speaks into your point about shared risk, was that a vast market, 1.3 billion people lacking electricity. We had a good solution. We have a good solution. But what we were finding was that companies, the SMEs in Africa, didn't have enough working capital to be able to buy the products in order for them to sell through their networks. And that was the bottleneck. So our commitment has been to develop a fund, which we provide the first loss on that, along with an organization, AECF, African Enterprise Challenge Fund, that have put in the bulk of the working capital. We then are able to extend that working capital to the SMEs. And of course, the advantage of this is that we know those organizations, we're that much closer, whereas the funding investors don't necessarily, there was a risk to them without going through an organization like us. So our commitment has been to $1 million for this fund, and hopefully through other social impact investors, we'll be able to extend that fund. However, of course, it's not really VC territory, because this is either 0 to 1% return.
So again, we're sharing wonderful stories of success. I want to know where the choices are, where the challenges are. What would it take you to take on the double the risk or to expand the fund? What's hard about what you're doing that the rest of us can learn from? Because running a fund is never easy, right? So it's great, but what's next? What's the challenge you got to overcome to get to a greater scale?
I think your point around scale is absolutely right. And I think this is where it comes down to partners. In fact, it shouldn't really, we've been able to set this up, but actually I'd love another organization to be running that fund. We've got the knowledge, the on-the-ground presence, but actually running, in terms of running a fund, that's not my or our core competence.
Yeah, and I think we're going to hear lots of those stories of people beginning to step out of their core competence. Even Habitat for Humanity, who's now doing so many things outside of what their core business was. And as we think about those questions of where do we land risk and where do we land investment, there's lots of implications for what kind of partnerships exist. So let's start to get into this partnership space of I'd like to see it. We have over here, we have a number. And we're going to come back to you.
Thank you very much. I think the idea of shared risk is a very important one. And it's very difficult. The challenge has been to get first loss money. Even development agencies or foundations, it's a tough challenge to get so. So what we have done is we've used a bit of financial engineering to solve that problem. And what we have done in a fund that we are working to create is use a step coupon structure. So on like-minded social investors, we don't pay them all what's due to them upfront. So we deferred. So instead of paying 7% return, we pay them a 2% return in the initial years. So it's a step coupon. And we take the excess cash flow and we use it as a reserve, which acts as a first loss cushion for those mechanisms. And that is a way to deal with the reality of that nobody wants to be in the first loss piece. And
so what's working to convince people that they should take their returns at that rate?
Well,
because you have to convince many investors to sign up for that.
Well, I think we are trying to convince them, and it's a pragmatic approach. It's not a very idealistic approach. It's really doing what is necessary to achieve the scale. Because what people are doing that are investing in this fund is taking some prudent risk, and creating a position. So what they do is by creating the reserve, they can bring in OPIC, for example, into the structure where they wouldn't be able to come in because by mandate they couldn't take the first loss position. But if we deferred some of our income up front and created the reserve, then we could leverage the fund by having OPIC invest $20 million into the fund.
Makes sense to me. I'm just worried about this question. How are we going to get 4 times or 400 times the number of people willing to do slower patient capital? Because the argument is quite clear to me. And it's clear to me at a time now where your other investments aren't making so much money, it's easier to say yes to it. And as the economy drops or goes up, how are we going to make that same case? How are we going to bake it in as part of the challenge?
I think the challenge really for us is about the first loss pieces. So the fund that we are creating, it's called the Essential Capital Fund.
Okay.
The partnership is that every time we put money in the early stages, it is leveraged up at least 80 times or 70 times to the amount that we would put into a fund.
Great.
So that's where the scale comes in. What we are.
So the question for us collectively, and I want to move to your question, is what would it take to get 400 times first loss money, or 400 times just making that number up, which is always dangerous to do in a group? I'll come back to you 1 second now.
At least if ladies are not first, but ladies are not last, I believe so.
There's more to go.
I'm Salima Ahmed. I'm the founder of Bangladesh Women's Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I'm a businesswoman, but I also promote women entrepreneurs. I just would like to say that, in Bangladesh, we know about microfinance, microcredit, but when I was working for promoting women entrepreneurs, there was a need for higher loans. And when we are going to the bank was not giving because we don't have collateral. So we asked the government and we lobbied to have a separate policy for women entrepreneurs and to have it without collateral and low rate of interest. And government created a fund which is under refinancing scheme, and also Asian Development Bank and also JICA. But when we had that fund, the challenge was that mostly women entrepreneurs didn't have that factoring, couldn't produce the accounting system, couldn't produce how much products or how much goods they have in stock. So the scaling up, as you were talking about, so what we did, capacity building, we train women entrepreneurs to how to get bank loans. So they become capable of getting a bank loan, to how to do a business plan. And now until June, when we were did a survey, we found that in the SME area, where I should say men, their growth is 0.33%. But when we did this sort of work, the growth rate is 13% for women entrepreneurs in SME sector, and we are hoping that in 2013 it will be about 21%. So I think if you really would like to scale up, especially for women, I think the capacity building, the skill development is very, very important, and that can, and also separate policy for certain times.
Right. Thank you. There's lots of evidence and proof around what investing in girls and women can do, but there are very direct questions about how much money you should do to direct investment versus capacity building and training.
I think corruption is also another problem.
There's lots of problems. Yeah.
Doesn't grow the scale up.
Yeah, sounds good. Stephan, you wanted to add something?
Yeah. So first of all, am I on?
Yes.
First of all, you were asking how do you get that 400 times, or how do you get those multipliers, right? In the fund world, you need to be able to make enough 10x's, let's say 10x, more than 400x. You need to make enough 10x's to mitigate all of the ones that didn't do well, because you're always going to have some failures. The only way to get 10x's is to have scarcity value, to have the kind of intellectual property that others don't have, and to not get into trouble where you're constantly chasing the next round of funding and you dilute the company so much that in the end nobody's running the ship. So to parlay that into your other earlier question, which is where did you fail, where were the difficulties, you'd be very surprised how difficult it is to raise a fund. Raising a fund in this environment is historically tough. And I hear a lot of people understanding that. And the statistic that bothers me the most as a person raised a fund is how un-Darwinian it is. It's survival of the unfittest. The ones who have performed the worst are the ones who get the most money. Why is that? Because it seems safer to invest in groups that have worked together before, who can show historic relationships with institutions. And it seems not logical to the layman, but that's what's happening. Yeah. So these are difficulties that I banged my head against for a long time. Yeah. But you get through it. You just persevere.
Well, we've already heard some nice stories about partnering and portfolio, but it doesn't happen that often, right? I mean, the challenges of partnering and doing this stuff, what would it take to do that more? I love when people bring up Darwin, because in Darwin's writing, he wrote about survival of the fittest twice. And he talks about cooperation and love 98 times, right? And so what would it take to actually cooperate?
The company Solyndra, everybody talks so much about, the campaign trail.
Yeah.
Solyndra is an example, and many other examples, of companies that took hundreds of millions of dollars but couldn't get to revenue. And when I look at investment classes that have been more successful than others, VCs did very badly. Angel investors did very well. They outperformed VCs. Why is that? It's their own money. They have thicker skins. They don't turn on management teams at a moment's notice to put in puppets. There's a lot of reasons why angels have done better than institutional investors. What I am trying to advocate here on this stage is let's take what angels do and apply it to scale with larger amounts. Let's keep companies leaner, give them less money, and make them obsessed about where tomorrow's revenue is coming from, and not just revenue, profit margins, and not just profit margins, but sustainable over time. If we do that, instead of worrying about big funding rounds and hiring 150 people and having big trade show booths, then our companies will be healthier, and their shareholders, their shareholders will make money because the acquirers will come buy them for a multiple for a very simple reason, because they won't have to sell themselves. When you're in the black, you'll sell yourself for 5 or 10x, and that's what we're not doing in the world of clean energy.
Yeah. So I like the idea of becoming an angel, right? It's pretty attractive. My experience is people aren't afraid of change when it works for them and they know they're going to become an angel. What people are afraid of is loss, of learning how to give up how they know how to be in the world. So what are we going to have to give up with the way our business models and the way we operate to be able to achieve that? Let's have a little bit of conversation. What do we have to change from the way we work now? Yes.
Diana Osgood, Virgin Unite. At the risk of sounding incredibly naive, and there is weight behind this, even though it sounds so naive, I think we have to give up being anonymous. We have to accept that connection. Why I think one of the components of angel investing that really works is there's a connection. There's a human connection behind the investment. And I think that's actually what we're going to need to get the kind of investments is mechanisms that allow people to connect to that with their investing. And then we'll accept lower rates of return and more risk.
What's it going to take to get that connection, right? Because I think about my most apathetic cousin. Right? And how are we going to get them to feel something, right? How are we going to do that?
It's communication skills, and it's understanding who you're talking to and who you're pitching to. It's pretty basic communication. Some people respond beautifully to the emotional, and some respond more to the data. It's finding out how people respond. I mean, we've been listening to a master here at the CGI, President Clinton. He touches all of us either by data or by not being afraid to speak emotionally with authenticity, and that touches all of us by different points.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for practicing that. Let's get some comments in the back. Let's get these two gentlemen.
I'm not an angel. I was interested in conservation. Well, your point is you need stories. And I've set up a business. I had to borrow money. I lost all the money. Now this business is in Madagascar. It's run by a Malagasy team. There's 360 women working on it. And this doesn't bring any money. But these women are involved into forest conservation. And this forest conservation, they hold medicinal plants that you're using in America now. You know, there's a Malagasy rosy periwinkle, which is treating childhood leukemia. And these are good stories. Why we should invest? You know, this is a sustainable business now. You know, they're making $450,000 a year. 360 women are working in it. You know, but it's not bringing in money. It's never going to pay back the money that I put in it. But I'm very proud that I've done that business and that I can have Malagasy people to run it. If we have more stories like this, but this needs to have some investment, thinking, what do we want? We don't want always to have money to make money. We want to have money to fight poverty. And if we have good stories, we're going to have more people willing to put money in it.
Yeah. And part of that, that's great. And part of that story is also a story of giving up control, of your control partly to the community. And so how are we going to give up some control and power to have more vulnerable stories or share some? Let's get the comment of the gentleman next to you.
Hi, I'm Dan Malura. I'm the CEO of RAD-AID, which is a radiology healthcare nonprofit. Before going to medical school, actually, I was at Goldman Sachs, so I'm very interested in the topic you're presenting today. One question I've always had is why there's never been an effective equities market for nonprofits. I know the idea has always floated before, but it has never really taken shape where nonprofits could actually sell equity in order to raise investment. The traditional counterargument has always been, well, nonprofits don't really own assets. Well, we know they do own assets because they have intellectual property, they have revenue streams, and they have projects that people can support. So I'm wondering, especially from this community of nonprofits and business, whether there's potentially any momentum for moving forward on a nonprofit equities market.
Comment up here. Thank you.
Alexander, if I can give an example of, I know we are talking about impact investing, but one of the questions you raised, how do you find others to put patients' capital? So I'll give you a very specific example. I remember 3 years ago when inclusive business was becoming a buzzword and people had to explain how do you incorporate the low-income citizen in the value chain of the company. I specifically remember somebody from the European Commission invited us to go and do a seminar inside EC to educate them. Only last month, we did something similar. I'm not naming another government, understanding impact investing. So I think what I'm trying to convey that we are here very knowledgeable of the subject matter, and we assume that the entire world funding community understands the concept of patients' capital, how impact investment can do the return. So reaching out to other donor community other than the United States is also something I would recommend.
Sounds good. Yeah, in the back, yes. Go ahead, please.
Yep. Hi, I'm Kate Storr. I'm the co-founder of Architecture for Humanity, and we provide planning, design, and construction services around the world. I have absolutely no skin in this game, but I'm sort of curious as to what the role of the local bank is in all of this. I've heard a lot of discussion about microfinance the last few years, and it seems to me that there's some weaknesses in the model in the sense that there's no local accountability, you can't move up the chain of credit, there's no one tracking your credit history, there's no ability to foreclose, there's no ability to repossess. And I was wondering, I would love to hear from the panelists or others about what the role local banks could play in being that angel investor.
Yeah. And I think as we answer these questions, not what role would we want them to play, but what would they have to stop doing of the way they operate now? And what are we going to have to stop doing? Because we can get a nice long wish list, but if we're actually going to change our institutions, what are we going to have to shift from practices? Any of you want to take that question?
I'm happy to. Actually, you're totally right. I mean, I think in order for any of this to be sustainable, the local banks have to learn how to make loans. Frankly, if you're a local bank, it's a lot easier to buy treasury bills than to actually take risk and lend to SMEs. So actually one of the things that we've been doing is working with local banks and applying risk mitigation to that. So for example, in Palestine and in Jordan and in Egypt now, OPIC is putting together a loan guarantee that and technical assistance that helps local banks learn how to make these loans to SMEs. And then we provide a guarantee on top of that and a loan-by-loan guarantee. So it's not a portfolio guarantee, which I think most of us know never works, or at least hasn't often worked. But actually a loan-by-loan guarantee can work. And this has been a way to get local banks actually understanding how to make these loans, how to do the analysis, and how to be successful. What we found is that in the early days, the first couple of months, our teams were rejecting 90% of the applications the banks sent over. But then after 6-9 months, we're accepting 90% of them because they've learned how to do it. And that's
what was the shift? Was the shift a technical skill? Was it a different risk?
Technical skill and understanding what information you need to make a decent SME loan. So, I think that using the local banks is incredibly important, not least of which is because they've got the local currency capability. So I totally agree with your point.
There's another comment back there, I think. No?
I was just taking a point from the sustainability one over here. I'm Kathleen Matthews with Marriott International, and we actually have partnered historically with OPIC on trying to support hotel development in emerging markets. We did a lot of work in Eastern Europe, for example, when travel and tourism was seen as one of the things that could really generate GDP and jobs in Eastern European countries when they opened up to the Western world. And so Elizabeth reached out to Marriott as we were looking at new investments in places like sub-Saharan Africa, potentially Haiti, other emerging markets, to see if we could put together a loan portfolio that was exclusively for green hotels, sustainable hotels. So could you take a loan portfolio and actually incentivize certain kinds of development and construction? So I think that that's another interesting thing to pursue. How do you sort of direct certain kind of behaviors that you deem are going to be in the best interest of the planet, society, by putting certain caveats on your loan programs? And so we're working together now to see if all the hotels that we start building in sub-Saharan Africa can have that green or environmentally sustainable component to them.
And when you were doing that, were there a number of caveats that you rejected? I mean, it's good to have caveats, but how were you discerning about what caveats there would be and wouldn't be?
I think the motivation for this was, as a hotel brand, and we don't own the hotels, we manage them, we franchise them. We were having really difficult times with a lot of our owners to get them to put the additional investment in making it a sustainable build. And so we thought, how can we get them to do it? It's their money. We're trying, but we have to motivate that behavior. So we can come up with all the ROIs we want, but ultimately it comes down to the capital and what they're going to spend on building that hotel. And this is where Elizabeth and her team was incredibly creative because they were trying to do the same thing, put that green lens on their development and their loans. And so it was a perfect match there.
Right. And it's wonderful when there's that perfect match where you could say that the green investment is going to work out over 5 years. But some of the investments we're trying to take don't work out over 5 years, or we don't yet know. And so how do we challenge ourselves to take that risk on? You got a comment you want to make on that or something?
Actually, not on that one.
All right.
I'll work that in.
Work it in if you
pick
can.
up on the corporate topic and the human connection and how to collateralize loans in the absence of, say, hard assets that the bank looks for. And so I'm with Root Capital, and we're an agricultural lender working with small businesses that aggregate small-scale farmers in Africa and Latin America. We work very close to the city and OPIC, and we've basically been doing for the past decade lending where, in the absence of hard assets, we're lending against bankable revenue streams with global corporations that buy natural products that are being exported. And so you're leveraging the non-financial assets of those corporations, their supply chain knowledge, their global scope, their expertise that can introduce you to businesses. And what's been really interesting recently is we've gone from maybe, in some respects, the easy stuff, the export crops and markets, to tapping into local supply chains for rising domestic consumption of staple food products. And so how do you do the same thing with, say, a General Mills who we're working with, where they know agro-processing and they know food business and they can help you de-risk even though you don't have an offtake agreement in dollars for mangoes being exported to Whole Foods. So, kind of how can we get those global corporations to get involved in helping to bank the unbankable with their non-kind of financial assets in local markets.
And so what are you discovering as you're trying to talk to these large corporations? What's the challenge of those conversations? Because when you have them, you're at the center of competing pressures, both about what you're trying to do, what they're trying to do, and historic business realities. So what are you discovering in those conversations?
So I guess maybe picking up on the human connection, what's fascinating to me is, so we and others like us in kind of this agricultural social lending have worked with, your fair trades, your organics, the folks who've drunk the Kool-Aid and who brand around sustainability, which is awesome. But I remember not long ago going into the research and development kind of unit of General Mills, and a company that's not necessarily all but fair trade, at least in terms of its brands, and walking in and having the head of their R&D department say, I've got like 250 machinists here who know more about extruders and making like Cocoa Puffs than anybody in the world, and 250 food scientists, and they are on fire to take our knowledge as General Mills and transform agro-processors, mom and pop shops across Africa. So it's a challenge in a company like that because that's not really what they grew up on. Yeah. But when you see what can happen inside those larger corporations when people get on fire and realize they can take their leverage their expertise, their market knowledge, et cetera, it's pretty cool.
It is really cool. I also find, from my experience walking into companies, I talk to people and I say, we want to be disruptive. We want to take great risks. And they will tell me a wonderful story about that. And then I say, well, what else is important to you? And it's short-term tracking, right? Where their shareholder values, where their margins are, right? And so it quickly goes down their list of priorities, and they'll tell me they believe in it. So I'm curious what's helping us make that shift so that fire can actually deal with the pressures are up against as an executive in a company. So you want to add something then?
Hello. I actually had a question for the gentleman from Root Capital. My name is Mpule. I'm with the Mpule Institute for Indigenous Development. We are an advocacy and public policy think tank in New York City, but we champion agriculture-led development in Africa, in 10 economies in Africa. So going back to what you just said, we're seeing a lot of private equity funds that are coming up in Africa, investing in agribusiness and agri-industries, catering for smallholder farmers. So I wanted to know, perhaps if you could talk about, from your experience, what instruments are there that are protecting then farmers? Because we're telling, our work tends to focus especially on female smallholder farmers. And so we're telling female smallholder farmers to invest in climate-smart seeds and then, of course, in fertilizers. But then we know, of course, with climate change that the rains are not necessarily coming along when farmers are anticipating that the rains will come along, and that farmers end up losing their crops. What financial instruments do you know of that you can talk about that actually protect the farmers in situations like this?
Well, that's probably a really long answer, but a little chip shot to get into it would be agriculture is back, no question. Philanthropy, public sector, focusing back on agriculture, and capital, as you said, commercial capital through private equity and elsewhere is flowing back into agriculture, but very little of it's going to smallholders. Most of it's going to large commercial farming in Africa in particular. So you need to really focus on a couple things. One, focus on inputs, seeds, plant, soil health, primary production, for instance, in West Africa, to mitigate Asian imports, reliance on imports from Asia of rice, which could be grown by local women in Senegal, et cetera. You need to focus on agro-processing, so have value add. But the reality is, at least in our experience, if you're working with the smallholders, given all of the market failures, which are deep and prodigious, you got to be honest that you are in the high-risk, low-return sweet spot. And therefore, you need capital that's appropriate for that. And you need first loss, and you need all the different tranches that Bob Neely was talking about. And that's not necessarily the land of private equity coming in. That's the land of, if not impact first lenders, a whole range of folks across the continuum. But I think it's a huge focus, and it's still pretty orphaned, even though folks are focused on agriculture. It's largely commercial with kind of hockey stick returns.
I love the idea of the high risk, low return sweet spot.
Hi, I'm Heather Grady, Vice President of Foundation Initiatives at the Rockefeller Foundation, proud supporter of Root Capital and many others in this room. I wanted to talk about an example of something that we are exploring. We haven't agreed it yet, but I thought it was a nice example coming back to where you started on how to at least manage risk, if not avoid it, but based on comparative advantage. One of my colleagues came back a couple of weeks ago. She's on our PRI, our Program-Related Investment team. and she made a visit to the DRC and the Central African Republic because we heard about a deal that was being potentially put together there for exactly small-scale businesses that are really starved of capital. And it's interesting because we would not have done this on our own, but the team included OPIC, it included the IFC, it included private investors, including companies that are already on the ground there that really have a longer-term interest in the well-being of the country. And I think that it's this, we ourselves would never have the resources to check what's going on locally on a long-term basis, but with OPIC and IFC with us, it makes it much more possible. And I think there's a lot of those kinds of partnerships that could really expand, particularly in countries like those two, where they're just starved of investment. And I know, Elizabeth, I just wonder if you might say something. I know my colleagues were mentioning OPIC's risk insurance that is, I think, a very good tool that some of us could take advantage of that I think not many know about.
Let me just ask you to follow up, though, on 1 second, because you're considering it, right? So what would you have to believe or what would you have to see to jump in? What are the things you're looking for? Because that's a complicated set of actors and a wonderful set of possible outcomes. What would you have to believe to jump in? What's the logic you're looking at to analyze that?
We do a calculation that sort of compares the social impact that we might get with the potential for losing the money. And so we have a long list of investments that we consider every year through our fund. And it's really saying in some of the deals we know that we're going to be taking a bigger risk, and in others they're surer deals. And so I think it's just it's really judgment at the end of the day. But in a case like this, where the rewards are so enormous, if that kind of an investment from us and a few others could build the confidence of a lot more investors to go into countries like that, then we think that's worth the risk.
Great, thank you. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, just thank you for that question. No, we couldn't agree with you more, and I think it fits in nicely with this conversation about risk mitigation. OPIC, its quintessential product was this political risk insurance, which we can provide to both corporates and LPs, in fact, that will cover the risk of expropriation, political violence, or inconvertibility of the currency. And we found that to be a very powerful product, particularly in attracting investors, for example, now into the Middle East and North Africa. Imagine we can say to that investor, you focus on the commercial risk, we'll take care of everything else. So that's been powerful. And I just want one last thing on that is we've been trying to adapt this product, which effectively addresses a government taking actions that are against the investor's interest and looking at the renewable energy sector. And as you all know, feed-in tariffs are a very important tool emerging markets countries are using to attract investment into their renewable energy sector. We thought, hey, what about if we could ensure a government's commitments to that feed-in tariff? And so we've developed an insurance product that will enable us to cover the risks of a change in the feed-in tariff that might damage an investor's investment in that country. So there's lots of adaptations that we'd be happy to explore with any of you that are interested in that product.
David, some of what we're talking about is local and local projects, right? And part of what you've done is de-risk at a significant scale. So how do we think about how do we need to understand scale to get to de-risking, or that relationship between local and large scale to do with some of the risk analysis that you guys do?
I don't have a good answer for that, but what I can say is you need to be up for it, basically. So I mean,
what does it take to be up for it? Because I'd like everyone to be up for it.
So if you're in our position, the bulk of our funding comes from, public money, from taxpayer money. It's from the governments of the U.S., the UK, Norway, France, etc., and then we get a big chunk of money from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So appropriately, I think every penny that we spend is analyzed to see what is going on. And if it's a penny that isn't being spent on buying a vaccine, there's normally a furrowed brow that says, well, what is it going on? So, I spoke about the GAVI matching fund during my presentation. In that, one of the things that we're doing is engaging with corporates, and I'd love to engage with folks who are here at CGI, about using their core business skills to solve problems that we have got on the ground. So those go around supply chain issues, logistical issues, cold chain issues, etc., and bringing to bear, cutting-edge private sector skills to resolve problems that have got, if you don't get them right, have got a big cost and ultimately have a big human cost if you get them wrong. But if you are going to engage in that and you're going to try and then both take the risks of that kind of public-private cooperation and then take what works and spread it across a number of countries, you've got to be up for it. So that means you've got to staff up, you've got to devote resources to it, and you've got to have your stakeholders on board. So all of those guys that I spoke at about at the top of the hour, you've got to look them in the eyes and say, listen, guys, this is a worthwhile investment, this is a worthwhile attitude, and it's a worthwhile risk to take. And so that is a challenge, but you've got to be up for that.
Great. Thank you. Let's get a few more comments. Yes, you want to?
I wanted to speak about corporate involvement. I'm a vice president with, forgive me, BT, British Telecom. And we spend $1 billion every year on charitable investment, not expecting return. In fact, I found it significantly interesting this year when money has gotten tighter, we chose to lower executive bonuses versus decrease our giving. So we work on a lot of projects, and we work a lot of our customers are consumer products companies who also have social investment, trying to create the next billion consumers. They have huge interests in doing that, and they have a huge amount of money that they're pouring into local farmers and local communities in order to do that. We do many joint projects with them that we invest in. You know, as an example, in the agriculture area, I won't mention the name, but one of the candy manufacturers is getting chocolate out of Africa, and they needed to train the local farmers on producing plants that would achieve the quality of chocolate that they need into their products. And we provided the mobile training mechanism for them in order to achieve that. Sure. That was a volunteer project that we did jointly with them. It was not a project that was funded by Mars. Mm-hmm. And so we do many of these things together. And I think one of the things we're lacking is really some sort of coordination for, really the high value return projects. When I'm talking about value return, I'm talking about social value return. Versus the amount of money that, outflows from the company on giving. How do you match? I mean, there's a million needs. How do you match the needs that are going to have the most impact? And that's really the challenge for corporations, is finding these types.
And how do you actually value the cost of coordination, right? If you're trying to justify how many vaccines, what was the price of your plane ticket over here, right? And the time we spend together, we all talk about more coordination, but it's dollars and time away from something else. I'm going to get a few more from the audience. We'll come back to you for some closing thoughts. Yes, please. It's coming to you. Yeah.
Thank you. Just to pick up on some of this is a bit crazy, probably, Paula DePerna Carbon Disclosure Project, but why not think about putting a dollar value on the social return so that, and this is a perfect role for philanthropy, because you could assign, we can measure the value of training. I mean, there are metrics. You can convert it into dollars. And even at a haircut conversion rate, you could lose dollars but get them back in dollars, indirect dollars. And somebody like Rockefeller and the bigger foundations are ideally placed to create, again, what we talked about a bit yesterday, a shadow set of books. A carbon price that's a shadow set in Microsoft's books is creating a consciousness about the value of the cost, or rather cost to pollution. The same would be a way of increasing, of assigning dollars to the social value that we get back from these investments, even if, say, the traditional banks don't recognize that. It's an alternative currency in a way. Yeah. And we could just declare it having a value.
Yeah. Maybe put some sunlight on it, not in the shadows necessarily. Other comments? There's one back here. Yeah, gentleman from Puma.
A few of us in this room have been working on energy efficiency, and those that are part of the built environment world know the difficulty in getting banks to lend towards energy efficiency in existing buildings, and how you aggregate assets and deal with risk. But there's a couple of learning opportunities that we've had. We were working closely with the foundation, looking at charter schools and how to increase energy efficiency in charter schools. An opportunity to put money back into the classroom. Long story short, after years worth of work of doing analysis, came down to somebody who, at the board level, said, "Well, gosh, if it makes so much sense, why aren't the banks doing it? Why do they need our money?" Similarly, we're working on trying to figure out how we finance urban farms and urban post-industrial cities, Youngstown in this case, and the urban lenders don't know how to deal with agriculture. So I don't know, whether it's a philanthropic source or local banks, there's a domestic opportunity as well that we need to find ways to break through and get, patient capital to where it's needed. So we just hope that we can keep that on.
What would it take? What are you finding it's taking to actually break through to convince them, right? Because that's a lot of convincing of it's their responsibility, you should take this up, this is really your work, even though you don't think it is. So what are you finding is working in making those arguments and that communication?
Persistence.
That's tenacity, right?
Boil it down to a word.
That's a good answer.
Yeah. Great. Two more comments. All right. One up here.
I think if you're going to change and achieve the scales that you've been talking about, it's really we have to change our mental models as to how we are looking at development. If you want to change development, you have to change the instruments that we are using. If you look at who the head of the World Bank is a political nominee. If the head of Deutsche Bank was reported to the Bundestag, the loyalty would be very different. So we need to, if you really want to change the world, then you have to change how we are looking at development and change our mental models and innovation and take some risk and go out to the outer branches and feed a lot of different ventures that could scale up.
Yeah. I think we all believe that's true, and we all know the challenge of changing our mental models. This is the only mental model I know, right? And so we think about what does it actually take to do that work. Last comment over here, and then we'll come back to our speakers and hear from some commitments.
So I'm fascinated by the Kivas that are channeling $300 million from regular folks into microfinance, the Prosper and Lending Club, which will facilitate $1 billion of peer-to-peer consumer loans this year, the Kickstarters, which poured more money into funding the arts than the National Endowment of the Arts here in the U.S., and opportunities to engage people. My sister, my dad, why can't we bring financing to scale that involves all of us, and the benefits that brings of engaging, not just the elite and financial institutions and foundations, but actually engaging the people in this transformation as well. And what asset classes are appropriate for crowdfunding at scale, for peer-to-peer finance? How do we leverage the internet, Web 2.0 technologies to scale? So we'd love to talk to folks about that. I think it's a big opportunity.
Great. Thank you. It's a wonderful challenge for us of what would it mean for us personally in this room to commit to more first lost dollars as an example of that. So in a moment, I want to come back to our speakers, just if you have some closing thoughts. I want to highlight two commitments before. First, Jill Sheffield of Women Deliver. Tell us a little bit about what your commitment is.
Thank you so much. This is a perfect moment. There was a commercial just now for the commitment that Women Deliver is going to make, and you're going to get to be part of it. Women do deliver, and we know that it's important to invest in girls and women because their effect on not just families but national economies, particularly in southern and developing countries, is really, really important. It's not just the right thing to do, but it's really a smart thing to do. So today we're telling you about a new funding platform that is both for individual funders and for crowdfunding. We've taken a lot of lessons from both Kiva and Kickstarter. This is not, well, it's global. You can choose the part of the world, the issue you want to invest in, the particular activity that you'd like to support, and 100% of your money is going to go straight to that group. We're not taking the overheads related to that. So check it out on the internet. It's just catapult.org. And if you'd like to talk to me some more about it, I'll be here right after. But in the coffee shop on the ground floor, the brains behind Catapult will be there and would love to talk to you.
Thank you very much. Neil Gosh. Sure.
Thank you. My name is Neil Ghosh. I'm the Executive Director of SNV USA. We focus on poverty alleviation and good governance in 35 countries. But our staff are actually based there, almost 1,000 people in 90 offices, only 10 in the US and 30 in Holland. And we focus on the poverty alleviation by using innovative models. We work in 3 sectors: agriculture, renewable energy, and WASH. And when I say innovative model, that's the one we are talking about today, which is inclusive business, impact investing, and our focus is inclusive growth. And that's really the key focus. That means we work with private sector when possible, and we focus on government policy development as well when it's necessary, and we work with social sector. So on the impact investing, a couple of years ago, we have 3 commitments. One of them is impact investing. We realized that as a development organization, I know our friend from Bangladesh talked about how do we provide the patients capital. So we decided that we'll make a commitment to facilitate investment of $50 million by end of 2013. We have facilitated 15 entrepreneurs and $10 million so far, and we have signed partnership agreement close to around $175 million. But again, this is a partnership agreement, money yet to be raised. We will see. So that's our commitment. Thank you. And I encourage all of you, if you need me, I will be with her at the downstairs. And if you need to talk to me, please, you're welcome.
Thank you. Well, Stephan, maybe just one at a time, I'd ask you to share any closing thoughts and reflections either on this conversation or the work.
Closing thoughts. You know when you're walking onto the airplane, you see those HSBC ads, aren't they cool? You ever see the one that says there's enough sun in North Africa to power all of Europe for, an entire year or whatever it is? That one really drives me crazy. Because if it's the case, why aren't we doing it? Well, there's a project called Desertec that some of you may be aware of that's been kind of languishing for many, many, many years in the planning phases. And it's in the planning phases forever. One of the biggest problems now that we sort of reduce the cost of solar panels is how do you get it to Europe from North Africa? Well, if you underlay under the Mediterranean cables, it's very expensive. And aside from the cost, you have the potential security risk that some Al-Qaeda cell would come up and bomb it after you finished building it, and that's also a problem. So how do you do this? Now, out-of-the-box thinking, we found a really cool solution where you could take bauxite, a mineral, which can be heated next to a solar, installation by a port in North Africa to a certain temperature where it becomes kind of like a really big battery. Then you float it on a barge to Europe and you drain it of its battery because it's rechargeable. You drain it of its energy and you float it back. So here you're kind of running a ferry service. These types of solutions exist. We can tackle climate change if we have the courage to take some risk, to think out of the box, and to pressure the banking and financial institutions to come along with us and not be so scared of innovations. Because that's the only way we're going to stop relying on government subsidies as a crutch. That's the only way. So I hope we can all do it together.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to just pick up on a few things that a number of you have said about the need for different kinds of capital to be aligned together. When you think about it, we are not going to even begin to solve the world's problems until we lean on the private sector. Trillions of dollars is out there willing to be brought in, and that money won't come in unless those of us that have different complementary risk appetites don't figure out a way to use our money in a way that catalyzes that money to be channeled to solve development problems. We talked a lot about scale and about cooperation and collaboration and partnership, and one of my former partners loves to say that cooperation is an unnatural act amongst non-consenting adults. And indeed, partnership is difficult. It's difficult and it's challenging. It's challenging often because we have our own institutional agendas. I mean, 2 agencies come together, 2 organizations come together, each has got its own methods, its own processes, its own methodologies, its own incentives. Its leadership wants to see its name in the annual report. So it can be very, very hard. Also, people think of their instruments in a very narrow way, as somebody was saying in the box. I once talked to a donor about taking a grant instrument and putting it in as first loss or as equity. And they said, oh, no, we can't do that. It's way too risky. Like, okay. In one case, you're definitely not going to get your money back. In another case, you might. So what's risky about that? Anyway, so I would just like to underscore what many people have said, which is please, 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 let's find ways to combine our resources to make something bigger happen. It's criminal that we, as my organization, is leaving hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars on the table for want of $2 or $3 million in first loss, $2 or $3 million in TA money or equity money. You know, we have, for example, there's a guy, American, that wants to build a pomegranate processing factory in the insurgent areas in Afghanistan, which will employ 300 people. Cost $12 million. We're willing to put in 8. He's got 2. 6 years we've been waiting for $2 million that'll create 300 jobs in an insurgent area in Afghanistan. In Haiti, $40 million for low-cost housing for reconstruction. We're willing to put in $40 million. Someone else is willing to put in 2. Took us 3 years to get one agency. I'm glad to say the Clinton Bush Haiti Fund came forth for first loss money for that. Too often our institutional agendas and egos and bosses are causing us to focus on our narrow little channel. So I guess I would close in saying, please, I implore those of you with soft money, with you philanthropists, you donors, please spend your money in a way and recognize and reward yourselves for spending your money in a way that catalyzes much bigger amounts of other people's money rather than spending it on your little one thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'd maybe just underline what Elizabeth has said. You know, we were saying over lunch, we've known each other for a long time, and we've spent our lives in public-private partnerships. And so, you know, not only do we know that they work, but we're kind of true believers and able to be dissuaded. And personally, you know, I've seen, you know, water brought to people who didn't have it before, roads brought to people who didn't have it before, sanitation services, through public-private partnerships and through the financing mechanisms that go along with those. So I think it's a nut we absolutely have to crack, and we have to get better and better and better at it. I think we've come a long way on the planet since, you know, I first started getting involved in this game, but there's a long way to go. And if you look in the space that I'm now in global public health, I mean, I think there's really a lot of potential for bringing in true commercial risk capital into development issues. And the reason I think that, and for creating financial instruments that appeal to that market rather than to just a philanthropic investor market, but a real commercial investor. The fundamental reason I think that is because if you step back and take a look at the universe, there is a lot of public money or foundation money or development finance institution money and resource that is available to deal with the risks that the commercial market won't take. So we've heard today that actually ironic equity, which is in the high-risk, low-return arena, it actually is available. I mean, Elizabeth is appealing for more people to think about it, but it is available from people who would traditionally give grants, and this is certainly a better solution than a grant. We've also heard that there's a portfolio of products out there. Jim Kim was mentioning it yesterday. You know, Elizabeth was mentioning it today, which are specific targeted risk mitigators, insurance and guarantee products, and so on. But there is also, certainly in the market that I'm now involved in, there are very large amounts of public money, whether it be from the Gates Foundation, GAVI, the Global Fund, whomever, which deals with off-take risk. So, you know, if the product succeeds, you know that there will be a market out there. And that's awfully valuable. We don't talk about that as a financial product, but from a market de-risking point of view, it's incredibly valuable. So I think we've got a long way to go. I'm fascinated by this area, and I would love to invite anybody who's equally fascinated to come and have a chat about it and see what is the next step that we can take. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So thank you to all of you for participating in this dialogue, trying to understand lessons learned and what's next, and we invite you to stay in partnership. So thank you very much.